Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA and Chair of the New Urbanism Division of APA, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, February 1st, and we will be hearing the presentation Autism Planning and Design Guidelines 1.0. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in that chat box found in your webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call that 1-800 number shown. For your content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in the questions box, again, located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Shortly, we will have a list of our 2019 members. Everyone is still signing up, so hopefully in the next couple weeks we'll have it posted up on our website and here. Today's webcast in particular is sponsored by APA Ohio. So thanks APA Ohio for sponsoring today's webcast and for all of our sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. Upcoming webcasts. On your screen is a list of what we have going on in the next month or so, and you can register for these webcasts by visiting our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Today's webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We will have some recorded webcasts available for distance education. We're finalizing that up now, getting them all ready for credit, and we will have that out to you shortly. For logging today's credits, just head over to planning.org, log into your MyAPA account, and then under the search for SEAM activities bar, you can either type today's event number or title of today's webcast, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage. Again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on things like our upcoming sessions, any cancellations, changes, or, you know, when we have those distance education sessions for you, we post everything on Facebook. And we are recording today's webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel. Just head over to YouTube and search Planning Webcast, and we'll have today's session up along with over 200 other sessions that we have hosted throughout the last 10 years. And those are all available for you to view. We'll also have a PDF of the session available at the conclusion on our webcast webpage. Again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So that's it for me for the moment. I'm going to turn it over to today's presenters, who will do quick self-introductions of themselves and get us started. So Rick, I am turning it over to you, and Kyle, you should have the screen now.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Ezel. I am sitting in Columbus, Ohio, in the Ohio State University City and Regional Planning Program. And I'm so happy to be able to share this work with you. And sitting next to me is
Gala Kornienko. I am third-year PhD student at the Ohio State University in City and Regional Planning Program, and I'm very excited to be here.
And I'm Rick Stein. I am a planner also in Columbus, Ohio. Kyle and I are actually sitting in different locations. I've been doing planning for about half my professional life. I have my own planning firm. Prior to that, I was a software developer. So a bit of a special kind of nerd. But let me give you a little bit of the background. Well, let's start with today. First of all, thank you all very much for coming. Initially, I thought I was going to be conducting a workshop almost simultaneously with this webinar. But when we woke up this morning in Columbus, we had about 8 inches or so of snow, and the workshop was canceled. And so next slide, Kyle. The workshop was supposed to be in the Franklinton neighborhood of Columbus, and if you're familiar with that, it's on the immediately to the west of the Scioto River in downtown Columbus. And it's the oldest neighborhood in Columbus, and it's seen decades and decades of disinvestment. And recently, in the last decade or so, it's come bounding back. And as much as it has received investment, it still is somewhat of a blank slate in a lot of places. And the workshop we were conducting, it was a conjunction with the nonprofit that I'm associated with, and I'll get a little bit more into that later. But effectively, what we were going to do at this workshop was apply the principles and the ideas and the elements of all of the hard work of Kyle and Gala and all the students at Ohio State that have participated over the last year and a half. So we were practically applying, the ideas, the design guidelines that Professor Ezel and the students came up with. And this was to be the second workshop. The first one we conducted in more of a suburban context, and this is the urban context. And I think this is a really good example of why this stuff is so exciting to me, is because we can take these ideas and apply them virtually anywhere. And that's, some of the brilliance of the way Kyle and the students organize this material, is that you can pick out things specific to the context that you're working in. And later on, Kyle will give you insights into all those specific contexts and those examples. But why are we here? How did this all get started? Well, 17 years ago, my first child was born, and this handsome young man that you see on your screen is my son Justin, and that old man standing next to him is me. And I actually left my job as a software developer to become a stay-at-home dad when he was born. And if you've ever had the opportunity to be a stay-at-home parent, it's a rewarding and fulfilling experience beyond your wildest dreams. It's perhaps one of the greatest things I've ever done. And for about a year or so, Justin was just like any other baby, crawling to walking, running around, knocking things over, really rambunctious, really athletic, always kept me moving. But, we noticed he was speech delayed. He wasn't, responding, he wasn't saying mommy and daddy like you would expect it. Certain milestones were being missed. And at about 18 months, it became a little bit more obvious that the speech delay was rather significant. And we started noticing some somewhat peculiar behaviors. He would sit by himself and get pots and pans out and spin them. And I'll be honest, I didn't necessarily think there was anything unusual about any of these things. But by the time he reached 2 years old and he still wasn't talking, we had reached out to the doctor, and the doctor goes, well, he may have autism, but I can't really be sure. And then that's when we got thrown into what I call the system. So Franklin County, where we live, they actually sent out a caseworker, and the caseworker was working off of our doctor's diagnosis, but which really wasn't much of a diagnosis. And the caseworker spent about an hour with Justin, and she told me and my wife, yeah, we think Justin has autism. And I'll be perfectly honest, that was a period of great confusion for us. I didn't know what autism really was. In fact, I was in flat out denial at first. You know, I was like, well, what does she know? You know, she only spent an hour with him and the doctor barely sees him. But, you know, in the days and weeks that follow that, you know, it becomes you know, reality starts to sink in. And, you know, you start to, you know, you struggle with it because you don't have a whole lot of information. And really from that point forward, we realized that we were going to need to become our own personal experts into what is autism. So that's a great question. What is autism? Well, autism has this real broad definition. It's a spectrum disorder, and it's a cognitive disorder. And so by spectrum disorder, that just means it can take a lot of different shapes and forms, from really highly functioning and you can't really even tell, to there's obviously a learning disability, a cognitive disabilities, you know, maybe nonverbal, maybe even restricted physical activity, but it takes, you know, many different forms. And there's this common saying in the autism world, you know, if you've met one person with autism, then, well, you've met one person with autism. And by and large, that really is true. But they do have some common traits. You know, they typically, you know, they have some of the, you know, there's some common things like, you know, you know, some are, you know, speech delayed, some avoid eye contact. But there really aren't a whole lot of those sorts of things. And another misperception is that they are, you know, all hidden geniuses, you know, because, you know, a few decades ago they had that movie Rain Man. And so, you know, people will ask us, well, you know, what's he really gifted at? And I'm like, well, I mean, he's got talents, but, you know, he can't sit down and play the piano without ever having seen a piano before. And he, you know, he can't count thousands of marbles on the floor like, you know, they do it in Rain Man. So, you know, it's been 17 years of really just getting to know Justin and getting to know autism. And more importantly, getting to see the challenges that Justin faces in our built environment, in our world. Next slide, Kyle. And so these challenges, there's a lot of the things that we commonly take for granted. So this is a picture of a street and a sidewalk in a neighborhood very close to us. And so Justin and I like to ride our bikes a lot, especially in the summer. Certainly not right now. But he doesn't like riding it on the street because the cars get too close to him. And I can't say as I blame him, because it can be dangerous. And a lot of times cars aren't looking for cyclists. And so he ends up riding on the sidewalk, which is fine until you run into pedestrians on the sidewalk or maybe even other cyclists. So one particular day that stands out is he was on the sidewalk and there were pedestrians coming on the sidewalk. So he didn't want to go on the street, so he rode into this family's lawn. And the owner of the home was outside and he saw Justin riding through the lawn and he yelled at Justin. And that kind of freaked him out. It upset me, but we kept riding on. And it's been a tough moment for me to shake, because, you know, what was he supposed to do there? I mean, he was literally terrified to ride in the street because of the traffic. You know, he didn't want to run into people, so he naturally just steered it into the grass. And, you know, that little incident, you know, is just stuck with me, you know. And so a lot of the experiences we have, let me just say this, they are not unique to individuals with autism or someone with cognitive disabilities. They are the same sorts of challenges that all of us have to deal with on a daily basis. And so, if you're into cycling, that the situation I just described is probably not unique. You've probably been through something like that before. Next slide. So another challenge we've faced is dealing with public transportation and bus stops. So we don't get a ride to bus all the time, but when we are in environments where that's certainly the easiest way to get around, like a denser urban environment, try to take the bus as much as possible. So, we've got a bus system here in Columbus, but certainly when we travel and we go to whatever city, we've been to Toronto and we're getting ready to head to Seattle, we'll take public transportation the entire time. But one of the things that confuses my son as well as me is just how to navigate that city's particular public transportation system. What is the fare? Where is the bus going? When is the bus coming? These are challenges that everybody faces. And I know a lot of transportation authorities are trying to take a lot of the headaches out of this by building apps and smart kiosks at bus stops. And these are certainly welcome improvements. But here you see a picture of a street that's under construction and the bus stop has been relegated to a pole with a sign bolted to it. And that's just not very helpful for anyone. And I don't mean to pick on our transportation authority, but this happens everywhere. And so the problems that he faces are really the same problems that I run into when I am dealing with a transportation network that I'm not familiar with. And then another common problem is just parking lots. So next slide, Kyle. Parking lots are somewhat, like the Wild West. We've got these lines painted on them and these lanes that you're supposed to traverse through, but traffic rarely adheres to these guidelines. There's cars zipping in and out everywhere, and it could be a very dangerous environment. And it is chaotic to the point where it scares my son. So, autism. When my wife and I were, when Justin was 4, we were in a support group, and they were trying to help the parents understand what it's like to live with autism. So they put us in this room, and they started flipping the lights on and off, and then they turned on a strobe light, and then they turned on loud rock music, and then they started banging pots and pans, and then they introduced some other lights. The point they were trying to make to us is this is the sort of interference, the sort of craziness that's going on inside the brain. It makes it difficult to filter that stuff out and focus on whatever the task at hand is. And so think about that sort of stimuli, massive amounts of stimuli going on, and you're trying to navigate a really busy parking lot. It could be disconcerting. And so, just the way that we really, the parking lots are almost, an afterthought. We just throw some paint down and we expect the cars to adhere to the spots. Next slide. So, we often talk about children with autism, and we're at a point now where we're diagnosing about 1 in every 59. I've seen 1 in every 50 children as being afflicted with autism spectrum disorder. And if you do the math, that equates to about 6 million people. And then you add in others with cognitive disabilities and or mental illness. And that now we're up to tens of millions of just Americans that have to deal with disorders such as this. And that's a lot of people. But we often talk about children, but you rarely hear anyone talk about adults with autism. And all those children hopefully grow up to be adults. And so if there's that many children with autism, there are going to be that many more adults with autism. And this is something that we need to think about as a society, because that's an awful lot of stress on the system. And if we're operating in an environment that is not optimal for all people, it could be enough stress to break the system. People often ask me, what my goals and ambitions are for my son, and I try to keep it simple. And I tell them I want Justin to be a taxpayer, because that checks a lot of boxes, right? If he is a taxpayer, that means he's likely gainfully employed, likely using some sort of transportation system, may or may not live on his own, but he's out there, got a job, paying taxes, living a productive life, just like all of us. And so, because I was keenly interested in making a difference and helping these children transition to adulthood, and ensuring that adults live a full and productive life, I found myself on the board of a local nonprofit called Autism Living. And so Autism Living exists for these reasons, to help facilitate these environments where adults can ultimately thrive. And so we're not interested in being property developers, but we want to help neighborhoods, private developers, entire cities, even regions. We want to help them understand some of these things that we believe are necessary to improve our environment. And while the motivation was autism, what we have found, especially through the great work of Kyle and the students, but what we found is that these principles, these design ideas, they ended up being good for everybody. In other words, it was, a quintessential example of universal design. And so with that, I'll throw it back over to Kyle, and I'll let him talk more in depth on the OSU classes, and ultimately the work product that came out of those classes.
Okay, thanks, Rick. What Rick didn't tell you is that about 2.5 years ago, he came to Ohio State to ask the city and regional planning folks how we can help. What can we do in a studio to address the problems that Rick described? And to be honest, when he brought his Autism Living folks in to talk to several of us, I didn't see how we could help his son and people like him through planning, because it's, if you think about it, when something's brand new, it's hard to know how to begin a project like that. There's so many different models that we can look to, but there was not a model for this. There was plenty of other research studies in other disciplines like architecture and it just, what's that?
Interior design.
Yeah, interior design, and of course there was a lot of studies in the medical community, but not in planning. So when Rick and I, we met in my office, I think it was for 4 or 5 hours. Rick, are you still there?
Yeah, so I came in to talk to Kyle, and I didn't really know Kyle all that well. We knew of each other, but we didn't know each other well. And I came in just to kick the tires on this idea. I think we had originally scheduled maybe an hour for the conversation, and I ended up there like 4.5 hours. We were just talking, and the ideas started flowing. And to Kyle's credit, he he knew this was a challenge. Like he said, it's all brand new. He didn't know. His initial reaction was, I don't know how I'm going to help. And by the time this meeting was over, we were both just amazingly excited to get going. And Kyle had a lot of ideas. And then I started getting emails and texts from Kyle, what about this? What about this? What about this? And it was just really exciting for me to see Kyle as excited about this as I was.
Right. So we began the process of cobbling together a studio for this, and before I want to say something before I start just explaining what we came up with. I am neurotypical, which means I'm not on the spectrum. Gala, who's sitting next to me, also neurotypical. So what hit me from the very beginning was, wow, we can't plan for them. We have to plan with them, and that made everything, that kind of the sky open up, because if you see there in the picture there, the guy next to Gala, the third from the left on the front row, that's Dr. Emilio Amigo, and he is a local, very well-known doctor who guided us through this process. And he also he introduced us to several of his clients and parents of the clients who were in our focus group. So understanding this whole other world that I never really thought about before, it opened my eyes, and it also I will never look at the environment again the same way. And just a couple examples of that is, I used to love to look at designs that were, bright and flashy and, lots of sensory stimuli. And now I don't. I think, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people that's bothering. And so this whole process was an eye-opening experience. Before I began, I have to tell you, this is not. I didn't do this. Gala didn't do this. This is student work. It's 100% student work. We guided them, but they did it. And we had lots of students and lots of people involved in here, but make no mistake, this is not my work, it's their work. All right, so what are we talking about here? I want to show you what first, because I want to reveal without, I want to reveal what we produce without making you wait to the end. So Gala will talk about the process, but I want to show you what the students came up with. Autism Planning and Design Guidelines 1.0, and it's 1.0 because this was a year and a half long process with 4 classes, undergrad and grad classes, but we don't have all the answers yet. So 1.0 is an invitation to other planners to take this and build it and figure out other solutions. So we're not saying we know everything, but this is, it's a start. So the contents are over on the side, and it's split up into different geographic contexts. So downtown, urban, suburban, and so forth. And we did that because, all these different spatial areas that have, wide differences in how they're designed. A developer could take any one of those if they're developing in a downtown environment or a park environment or a multimodal hub environment. That's how the students decided to organize this. And also, Gala will talk about the appendix. The appendix is 100 and some pages long, and that will show the process. But here are the context. The students use Rhino software, Rhinoceros software, which is kind of like SketchUp but more advanced. And you can see how these are some of the designs that, kind of the meta viewpoint from the ground. And then here's some examples of what the design guidelines look like. And the students had a real fun time learning how to write zoning codes, or at least write like a zoning code should read, very straightforward. And I taught them how to write like a robot, and I did the robot dance and write like a robot, and then this is what they produced. But you can also see the outcomes of a lot of research. So it says from the research, and suburban guidelines, the streets, from the research, the sidewalks, from the research. But the big reveal here is the 6 feelings framework. This puts it all together. It's the culmination of how a designer or an urban planner who's writing zoning codes or doing urban design work, all of these feelings should be addressed. So you should design your community to make people feel these things: connected, free, clear, private, safe. What's the one on the right? I can't see it because anyway, there's 6 of them. I can't see the last one because I have a window up for the webinar. But these 6 feelings are important because let's say you feel connected. One of the things that came out, one of the results of the research, including focus groups, was the conflicts that happen in the public realm. So, for instance, if you're on a bike path, it's multi-use paths that we call them multi-use paths, but multi-use can also mean too much multi-use when you have sensory overload. So the outcome of the research here is that you have separated lanes. So you have one lane going one way separated by a median. That could be shrubs, and then you have also going in that direction on the right side. You have separated uses. People are running or walking on one side, and then they're using 2-wheeled vehicles on the other side. So this is very interesting too, because for planners, we usually think about density and connectedness and making people feel closer. But part of the research that contradicted some of that is that separation is not a bad thing for a lot of people, and this proves that. And free, Rick mentions his son Justin and how he rides bikes. Well, you can't feel free if you get yelled at if you are riding a bike in the grass, and you can't feel free if you are if you're using this bus stop and you have sound sensory stimuli overload, and you're right next to maybe a semi truck that's 10 feet away from you. So this is just, it's very apparent that this is not going to be a very free experience for someone trying to get around and finding freedom to move. I can't turn it. I'm stuck. Chris, I'm stuck.
Okay. Try. Oh, you got it.
Okay. All right.
Chris, I'm stuck.
It happens.
Okay, good.
It's live. So one of the more interesting concepts that came out of this in the same way as the separation concept is this atom. You see on the right side the atom shape. This is a transportation network that the focus group said that they would rather have instead of the hub and spoke. They could have more oval overlays that create an atom shape to make a lot more options happen for getting around town, because some of the focus group folks said that if you live on the end of a transportation network that's on a street and you want to go diagonally, oftentimes you have to go downtown and then go back up. So this is one of the interesting things that came out of it for transportation planning. Another big idea is to figure out how to allow people who are in the public realm a chance to know that they can get help or information. And our focus group came up with magenta as a shared color that people liked. And that was just our small focus group. So it may not be universal, but we used this as an example to show people that there are opportunities to get help out in the community. Another big issue was accessory dwelling units, and that's a topic all over the country right now. But instead of people aging in place and having staying in the community and being next to family, same thing with people with autism. You may not want to live in the house, but you want to live next to the house. So accessory dwelling units are important. The next one, feeling clear. Separation comes up again on the sidewalk. Again, Rick's example of conflict on the bike, same thing on the sidewalk. And also, a lot of our focus group responses or respondents indicated that they would like wayfinding on the sidewalk because looking down on the sidewalk to keep your bearing, to know where you're going, to see where you're going, to have wayfinding arrows and also information on the sidewalk would be very helpful. Okay, here's another example, to have both vertical and horizontal wayfinding. Feeling clear too, there's a lot of people with autism don't drive and they rely on a caregiver to pick them up. So having a spec to build out an engineered pickup and drop off area, to have a shelter to wait, a designated shelter, and also idle lane and a moving lane, so people can pick up and drop off effectively and have a designated space, say on the Ohio State campus, which is huge. This was something that a lot of planners don't have in their zoning codes. And also, we were thinking that the students thought that pickup and drop-off areas would be important for the new autonomous vehicles that are becoming more popular all the time, to have these for the neurotypical population as well. Private. This is Ohio State's center of the oval, and it's not very private. So one good idea from the focus groups and the students' design shows a kind of a soothing space, so people will know where to go if they need to find respite from the crowd and stimuli. I'm gonna skip that. Feel safe. Rick mentioned that walking through a chaotic parking lot is not something that a lot of people like to do, even if you're neurotypical or not. And one of the designs that came out of the retail parking lot is, this is a typical design, a before design, and then this is an after design to separate the parking lots and have sidewalks between them, so that you don't have to walk through the parking lots and have conflicts with people backing up, people driving through. And here's another example of that. So you can see that from the research came very practical designs. And like Rick said, these designs are better. This would make everybody's life a little bit better. The world would be a better place if these designs were implemented. Okay, and calm. Oh, calm. Separation comes up again. Complete streets is a concept that planners talk about a lot, and these specs show the multimodal street design that is it's more separated than an ordinary complete street. And you can read more about all of this. We'll give you information at the end, but there's a lot of really good and practical information that came out of the study. Okay, now is this your turn? Now here's Gala Kornienko, and she will tell you how this happened. This is the extensive process that the students went through.
Hello, my name is Gala. So I will tell you the process and how we got there. It was interesting to know that Kyle was going to have this autism planning class, and I emailed to him and requested to be his teaching associate for this class, arguing that I already took so many classes on mental disability from public health, disability studies, and I did intensive study of qualitative methods. And I want to thank here my professor Jan Nesper, who taught me about ethics of research and taught me about research process, and especially about institutional review board and how it's done. because all that knowledge I brought to the class, and together with our students, we were taking exam to be able to participate in a human research subject. And I will explain you more in detail how it went. So as you know, I am a PhD student in City and Regional Planning, and I'm also the administrator of American Plan Association interest group, underserved population interest group. And we created this interest group with the hope. We created this group with Rick and Kyle with hope that it will become a division within American Planning Association that would focus on different issues of underserved population and including people with different disabilities. So before we started this long journey, we had to train ourselves in human subject research, and it was a very long process. The whole application took us 4 months, and it was very frustrating for students because it was new, and sometimes we didn't know how long it would take. We had to dig deep in very specialized literature, medical literature, disability studies, psychology, neuroscience, and we as planners are not specialized in those subjects. So we had to bring that literature from other fields and other research and bring it into planning and see how it can help us to inform our process. We also had several experts who came to talk to our students and to us. And one was Paula Rabidu. She's Associate Director in Nissinger Center here at OSU, and they work with different development and disabilities here on campus. We brought also speakers who were on spectrum to explain how it is live this kind of life, so students would be introduced before even going deeper with this particular topic. The whole semester we were working on design and focus group and figuring out how to accommodate adults with autism in order to get the information we were looking for. And also we had separate focus group with parents in different rooms, and all this process was facilitated with Dr. Amigo, who knows about autism. He works with these clients, and he was guiding us through explaining how we should accommodate adults with autism during the presentation. We also published an article in Planning Magazine, when every day is sensory overload, learning to plan with people with autism, not for them. And you can find it on a planning website and look into it, because we talk here about public participation process, how we can include people with autism into the planning and design. And this article shortly cover how we went through it. And if you want to include this population, and if you plan to include this population into your planning process, you can read this article and learn from there and talk to your communities and people who know about autism and can guide you through the process. That way we can create more inclusive planning in our cities. After the focus group, of course, our students and us, we were working on qualitative data coding, learning how to do it. And from that, we were preparing materials, policy, suggestions for the charrette. And charrette was the planning event that we organized here at OSU for 3 days planning event. I want to highlight, these are the people who were during this process. It's not only us, 3 of us who are doing this webinar. There were around 50 or maybe more students, graduate and undergraduate. They were advisors from Autism Living organization that were our main clients. We had research advisors, we had people from different fields at our charrette. Those were designers, architects, planners, people who work for Columbus Public Health Department, ADA coordinator, American with Disabilities Act specialist. You can see all of them and here, and this is even more, that we had even more people who were helping us. The whole process was very strict and very direct. We had to go through we had to create research protocol, write objectives of our research, do a literature review, and design and methods. And this you can find online. We will have the link for these materials, the appendix, the design ideas and how they were formed. In order to make focus group, we had to make slides, even though it's not a common method for qualitative research, because it's considered to be guided, kind of guided answers process. But we were advised by Dr. Amiga to do this because for adults with autism it was hard to imagine something that's not here, not happening. So we had to have these slides, kind of guide through the process, ask them questions about their everyday life. And we focus mainly on transportation, housing, and recreation. Those things that they do in the regular daily life, and what obstacles they have, and how we can eliminate those obstacles. After these focus groups, we developed framework, and Kyle already mentioned it, this 6 feelings framework. We designed some ideas, review it, and the final product was the book with the guidelines. So others across the United States and other countries could look at this free online design guidebook and use it and implement it. During this process, lots of students learn what is autism, how to do ethical research, what is how the scientists go through very long process to prepare this kind of research. And our main idea was kind of to broaden the concept of universal design and making it that way that we could include cognitive disabilities, because still universal design is more focused on physical disabilities, and we want to broaden that concept. And we were told that safety, feeling free and clear is for everybody, and we agreed. Yes, it's probably desirable for everybody, for neurotypical people like me, Kyle, and Rick, but it's very crucial for people with sensory difficulties, people with autism spectrum, to have those things that they were asking us during and sharing their experience during focus groups. Then we did assessment of our data and kind of summarized and made general comments about those ideas, and created 27 posters, including literature review, including focus group material from parents and from adults with autism, and also based on the scientific literature, neuroscientific literature. The charrette was a long process, 3 days. First day we invited we invited specialists from different fields: architects, designers, planners, public health officials, ADA specialists, and they look through those posters from research, literature review, focus group materials, and were trying to create ideas for new spaces that would be inclusive and would make life for adults with autism better. And after this process that we had, those discussions and designs, we also, second day, we invited adults with autism to go through those suggestions, to look at the designs and see how they perceive that. And you see some of our clients here on the screen. Because they have difficulties with sensory overload, some of them had to have earphones. We had to allow them to use other means to communicate their ideas, because some of adults are nonverbal. So when you are considering having public meetings, including people with autism, you should learn how to accommodate them, what other means you can use to include them in public participation. And also, they would, some of them were drawing, so we provided some materials for them to express it on the paper if they wanted, and testing those ideas on the paper. After that, 3 days charrette, our students were summarizing the work of all of that and putting in design in the book. So I give the microphone to Kyle.
Hi. So we wanted to show you the impacts the student work has had so far. The City of Dublin is using the six feelings framework in their micro transportation plan and their implementation of a new system to help people who are not mobile to become more mobile. The Athens, Ohio is a college town. Ohio University is there, and the Paul Logue, our alum, who is the city planner there, is using our guidelines with a disabilities board to help amend their new comprehensive plan. And so the Athens, Ohio will have the six feelings framework in the policy, which is it's very great. It's nice to see. You know, we all know as planners that when our work is implemented, that is when, you know, the plan doesn't sit on the proverbial shelf. So it's fantastic that that's happening down there. Also, we worked with Columbus Public Health, in particular Scott Ulrich, and the students were looking at their citywide planning guidelines and coming up with specific changes that Scott can help implement into his design review, because he is the public health planner that looks at all of the development plans that go through the process and makes recommendations. So these six feelings framework, will influence future projects in Columbus. So what happened last fall was an extension of the research. We were worried that just because the students came up, they synthesized all this data and then they came up with their own designs. Well, are they correct, or can we change anything? So there was a whole semester of retesting, or actually testing, and then more focus groups out in the field with the new specs and the new measurements for, this is what you see on the bottom there is the multi-use path. And then you see that the revised multi-use path is on the right. That made it more clear. Actually, it separated the uses between the median instead of the uses on each side of the median. That was one of the outcomes. So if you want to look at the appendix, the guidelines trial is in there, that you can see how it worked. And again, I'm going to give credit to the students. They really like this. All of you who are planners know that we want to help people. I mean, we're in this business because we're trying to make communities better for people. And this is the most beautiful and most meaningful project I've ever worked on in the planning practice, in the academy. Never seen such student enthusiasm. They took complete ownership of this project, and that's why I think this project is very high quality. Oh, here's some more testing. So you can see the crosswalk testing on an OSU campus, and they're using magenta again. And what is that? That's the pickup and drop off. Yeah, in the middle. And then on the side, the right side is the soothing spaces. And so they constructed the soothing spaces. Also, these students also worked with Team Better Block, the tactical urbanism group from Dallas, who came up to do a tactical urbanism experience for the Near East Side neighborhood, and these students also implemented those designs there as well. What's that?
Adults with autism testing.
Yeah, you can see there. I left out that these are focus groups. The students are gathering information from the adults with autism that are testing these designs. Many of them, who were in the focus groups from months before. So here's the article that Gala was talking about in Planning Magazine. Matter of fact, it's in the October 2018 edition. And then Rick and I also wrote a past memo here that described the process that we've just shared with you. And you can look at that. That was August of last year. I'm going to give this back to Gala because she wants to talk about this one.
So this was a very interesting event that we attended with Kyle. We learned from news. It was amazing experience because we learned from news that the first Center for Autism and Innovation was created in Vanderbilt University. We contacted the director of the center, and right away they replied to us and told us to come to the conference that they just planned to share what we did with autism and our research. And we were lucky to see one of the first advocates for people with autism, Templin Grandin. You can see her on the photograph, and share this book that we created with students with her. I gave her the book, and I hope she can read it and give us feedback on that. Also, this January, I visited Transportation Research Board workshop. I was invited by young planners in airport planning, and I was lucky to be invited and share our research. That's what students did with these people, and we hope that our ideas would be implemented in airports. Also, we shared our research not only with practicing community practicing planning planners, we also shared our research with academia. This was the Association of Collegiate Schools of Planning conference in Buffalo. And this is the link where you can find the guidebook, or you can just Google Knowlton School and Autism and it would pop up. Also, if you plan to attend San Francisco National Conference this year in April, we would like to see you and tell you about our research or how we can build our planning with underserved population interest group into division. And these are the speakers. Joanne Shelley, she is working now on transportation and implementing our design in their plans. And these are our contacts and the information about the group that that you can join. And I give last word to Rick. Yeah.
Thanks, Gala. You know, as you saw, albeit briefly, many of those ideas that came out of the student work, you know, these things can be used to solve a wide variety of planning problems. You know, we all know that there's generally a housing shortage across the United States. Well, you know, addressing, you know, the zoning code and what is allowable, you know, specifically, you know, allowing accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, you know, stuff like that can go a long way towards helping alleviate these housing issues and help solve these problems, you know, for the autistic community. And you saw the parking lot example, you know, where we provide the walking lanes. Well, you know, that also presents another opportunity for parking lots to install more robust electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which we know is really the wave of the future. You know, so that's an opportunity, you know, to effectively take care of more than one problem at a time. I really would encourage you all to download, you know, the planning and design guidelines version 1.0. You know, share it with your peers, and they don't have to be just planning professionals. You know, there's a lot of interest across multiple disciplines. And I want to stress, like Kyle mentioned, this is an iterative process, and by no means should version 1.0 be the end. You know, I have visions of this going through multiple iterations of improvement. You know, let's add to it. Let's alter what's in there. You know, this should very much be a dynamic document. And, you know, ultimately my goal, and albeit this might be somewhat pie in the sky, is to perhaps, you know, get an amendment to the Americans with Disabilities Act to recognize that there are, you know, millions, tens of millions of Americans living with some form of cognitive disability that could be helped, you know, through some of these recommended changes. You know, the original ADA was very much focused on physical disabilities, and so, you know, we see this as a complement to that document. So without further ado, I think I'll throw it back to Christine. I think we may have some questions that you want answered.
Yeah. And I want to say regarding on your screen now, if you go to planning.org/division/groups/underserved, so the way that this works is APA has many divisions, and those are dues paying. I think they're $25 to join one of these divisions. But this underserved planning with underserved populations interest groups are sort of like a step to the side of divisions. They're not divisions yet, but I'm fully expecting this to become a division any day now, you guys. So right now it's free. So if you go to that link, you can join the interest group, get information, and it's free right now. So please do that. And there are, I think there's like 7 interest groups right now, so feel free to check out the rest of those too. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive into some of these questions for you guys. The first one is, and this I guess might be for Rick, just from your perspective as a dad who has probably done a lot of homework on this. Has anyone suggested reasons for the rise in autism over the years, or is it just being diagnosed more frequently? Do you have any thoughts on that? I know you're obviously not a medical doctor or, you know, someone who has extensively studied this, but in some way I think you probably are.
Well, when back in, I want to say like 2004, 2005, when we were spending a lot of time at the pediatrician and really just trying to get our, you know, get our feet underneath us, there was a lot of rumbling and grumbling about vaccines. And what I want to stress is it is not due to vaccines. Please pay no attention to that. You know, that was some discredited research. And so, you know, what you still hear some of that talk today, and I'm quick to tamp that out when I hear it. The most common reason given is it just a rise in the ability to diagnose it. And I do believe that. I can't personally discount environmental factors. And I know there is research ongoing, but like, you know, I am not a doctor and I am not conducting environmental research. But, you know, when I think back, you know, on my childhood and, you know, my classmates, I now see that I went to school with several people that likely had autism, and they were not diagnosed. You know, they were put into, you know, special classes, you know, where they were all kind of lumped together. And, you know, really, you know, they were kind of victims of not being diagnosed and not knowing how to, you know, properly educate them. So that's my best answer. I guess that's where we're at today.
Okay, thank you. The next question, this person is a school planner, and well, I guess it's not more of a comment. Please comment on the content that you went through today and how it is applicable specifically to elementary schools and high school campuses. What can we take out of today and plop in a school campus setting?
Can you hear me, Chris?
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's Kyle. I'll take that one. There are two important takeaways here regarding design. One is that there are 1.0 designs that the students created from all of that background research. And then there is the second takeaway is that there is this 6 feelings framework. And when we were in Vanderbilt at the Autism Innovation Center, the 6 feelings framework was the star of the show, according to most of the folks there who were in any planning related fields such as civil engineering or architecture, because if you're in a school, elementary school, you can take this framework and you can begin asking yourself the question, do you feel that these things connected, free, clear, private, safe, and calm? And then as Gala mentioned, the Planning Magazine article spells out how you can include neuroatypical people into the process. So what I would suggest is to take this 6 feelings framework and then create your own public input meeting from local folks, and also is important too is that every community has a Dr. Amigo. So there are counselors and folks in your community that would probably love to be a part of that sort of a process.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Have you consulted at all with the ADA in these guidelines?
American Disabilities Act.
Yes, during the process, we invited ADA specialists to our charrette, and some of the professors who were teaching disability studies here at OSU, we were consulting with them as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. This is for Kyle. The diagrams look as though you might have incorporated a little bit of form-based zoning. Is that the case, or have you considered how that might affect your outcome if you adopt that particular zoning model?
Yeah, I think I didn't think of it at the time, but that's a really good observation, because you look at the contextual diagrams and you see form, and you look at most all of the student renderings or the sketches, and you see form. So this really is, I'd say, would qualify to be a form-based code that's based on a whole other way to look at the world. But yeah, I would say yes. I'd say this is probably a form-based code.
That's an interesting take on that. Next question. So how do you get a developer to buy into all this?
Rick?
Rick?
All right. So, in my professional life, I work a lot with developers, and if you've ever worked with a developer, you know that they are hesitant, to say the least, to work outside of their comfort zone. And the reason for that is that's where they found profit. That they're in business to make money, and they have profit margins when they're basically working within the constructs of what they're familiar with. So that it all fits nicely into a pro forma. So I think getting to get developers to buy into this is kind of a multi-pronged process that you attack from different angles. On the one hand, I don't have a problem with kind of pushing this as a marketing agenda. This facility or this campus or this is quote unquote designed with these guidelines in mind. It probably wouldn't be terribly dissimilar from how we got developers to start adopting green building principles and adhering to LEED standards. A lot of developers will tell you that they initially got into it because it was good business, and then they used it for marketing. So getting kind of nudging a developer from that angle could be effective. The other is from the public pressure. It is just good business. The public expects these things, and maybe a city or a neighborhood, addresses this via, the planning process or zoning changes, that this is going to be the standard and you will have to adapt to this. A lot of developers were not thrilled when the ADA was passed. We are at a point now where, we as citizens and users of these spaces, users of these buildings, we wouldn't, we notice when those things are not featured, when they're not accessible ramps on sidewalks or elevators or ramps at buildings. And so it's just a combination of those things, I believe. I don't expect dramatic change to happen overnight, but it does, over time, as pressure is applied little by little from different angles, things will change. And I've worked with enough developers to know that, they want to build a product that is going to be successful. You know, their reputation is on the line, and you know, they do want to make money. And so if the demand for these features is such that, you know, it is in their best interest to build them into a project, they will. And over time, you know, developers don't like to get left behind either. There's a lot of competition. So when they see one developer doing it and being successful, it generally invites copycats. So I think it's, you know, it's several things over time. But, you know, at least initially, you know, the good old-fashioned art of persuasion and showing them that they can use this to differentiate themselves from the rest of the herd. I mean, I know there are two developers that I work with that I can think of that I've brought these ideas to them, and they're keenly interested in incorporating them. You know, they do want to help people, but they also want, you know, they want to stand out, and so that these ideas are exciting to them for those reasons.
I would like to add something to it. I think we also have to have more planners with autism, more designers, more architects with autism. So this change would happen from within, because as we highlighted, we are not planning for, we are planning with. So the more inclusive planning profession, architecture profession would be, the more people neurodiverse on spectrum would be in the profession, the easier it would be for us to make those changes. And I think it's very important also for our students, because they didn't know about neurodiversity, they didn't know a lot about autism unless they had someone in their family on spectrum. But after this class and after this year work that we did, they're already aware of that, and they're going now and work in their planning jobs, knowing what autism is and how to make inclusive planning practice.
Thank you. Next question. Oh, this is a good one. So it appears that many of the solutions require an increased right of way horizontally. So what happens when you're deep in the middle of an urban center and they have right of way constraints? How do we account for that? What do we do?
Hey, I want to answer that if I can. That is a great question. And if you remember the multi-use path example, it's a lot wider than the normal multi-use path. It's like widening a freeway, and of course it's going to require more right-of-way, more land, and so it is a complex situation when you have, you don't have a lot of green park space to deal with, and you're if you're in the middle of a city, you certainly are going to have to think more critically on how to do this sort of separation in a way that doesn't disrupt property owners and other important rights of way. So the answer to that question is not, we don't know yet. I talked to one of the parks planners in Columbus about that design, because it is so wide. And so the parks planner said, I don't know if anybody will really do that or not. I mean, I'm not sure. But then you look at, for instance, in Columbus on the Olentangy River, there's a standard 10-foot bike path, and all the way to downtown on that bike path, there's plenty of room to expand out a little bit, another 10 feet, another 15 feet. So it's hard to know now, right now, after this study has just been completed, what the issues are. Like, if you're in the very middle of downtown, you can kind of envision those sorts of issues, but to kind of inventory where those impossibilities for right-of-way expansion are, I think that would be a good project for another planning studio.
I'd like to add something. We are entering in a period where the right-of-way not just on the street, but including the sidewalk area, there are going to be some battles fought. You know, there are a lot of rapid changes coming to transportation and the delivery of goods. You know, there are some cities now where autonomous robots roam the sidewalks, delivering food, delivering, you know, hot food and groceries. And they're also competing for space with, in some cases, cyclists, with scooters, with pedestrians. You know, cities are, I think, finally realizing the value of their curb space, and you know, is the highest and best use for that space, is that necessarily parking? You know, does it make more sense to dedicate lanes for bus transit? And you know, these are discussions that, you know, in this context, you know we need to have them, but when you consider all these other things that I just talked about, you know, now is really perhaps the perfect time to start reconsidering, you know, how the rights of way are used today, you know, regardless. And then when you just factor this in, it's just one more thing to consider. But like Kyle said, you know, there's a lot to figure out, and we don't claim to have all the answers, and we're really hoping that, you know, the more planners we can get this out to and get involved, we can tweak these ideas and improve upon them. But you know, again, I think it's really important to consider these things in the broader context of urban planning, with all these other things going on.
Okay, so here's another monkey wrench. How do you rectify planning for people on the spectrum with people who are audio or visually impaired, who may need more sensory consideration? So whereas our friends on the spectrum might need less sensory, some of our other friends who have vision or hearing issues are on the other end and need more. So what do we do?
So we already have some issues, conflicting issues, for example, with tactile paths and people who have spine cord injuries, because for them it's a problem when they navigate the sidewalks. So I mean in disability communities and people who work on ADA improvements, we're already discussing those issues. Aiding cognitive disability will make it more complex, but we have to start talking about those conflict issues and how to solve them. It's similar to the bike path and people who are running, people who are biking, how we make those spaces accessible for everyone, not only for bike users, not only for people who walk, not only people who are in wheelchairs, how we modify our spaces to make them more inclusive. So I think it's the future that we have to work on.
And that's a really great example of, we need more people in the room, you know, with these different experiences, all at the same time. And you know, these really should be, you know, bottom up planning processes. And again, can't emphasize enough, we need more diversity in the profession. That's one thing, but we also just need we need to be more inclusive, you know, when we're thinking about these things, and get everybody at the table, you know, as stakeholders.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Did you have any restrictions based on state DOT regulations? So did the regulations allow for those stripes, or did you have to apply for some sort of modification? Do they work well? Do they play well with you?
Do you mean the magenta stripes on the streets?
Yes.
Is that what? Yes. Well, we spent about a month working through the Ohio State system to get tape down there. But in the Better Block event on the east side that I mentioned previously, they used paint. They used magenta paint. It's not permanent paint, but it's permanent enough, and it was quite a it was hard to get through to yes on that one. Yes. And I bet it probably still a little bit magenta over there today, even in the snow. So go ahead, Agal.
I want to tell the experiment we did on campus, because we were using tape, and I was during the asking QA session with adults with autism. So because that tape was kind of fluorescent, it was not good. We couldn't paint on campus. It has to be temporarily. We tape it and then remove it. So we had limitation in choosing the materials. So how we put the tape was not very good in terms how the lines were kind of crossing. Adults didn't like that. They didn't like that luminescent color. So I would say that what was on the paper and we put it on campus didn't work that as we expected. But I think if we used paint, like Better Block used paint, that probably would work. So it's all testing period. What was on the paper, and during focus group, we have to put it on the ground and test it. The same was with the drop off and pick up place. There was some suggestions what was not working. Also, it's very hard. It was very hard for adults with autism imagine something. Like we put what we have, the materials we had, and then we would ask them, would it look differently if we put something else? So it's hard for them to imagine that. So there was some difficulties implementing it, but I think it's a good start.
I might also add, there's a few tricks in the planner's toolbox. One of them is, tell everybody this is temporary, and then as it becomes accepted, it kind of becomes permanent. And then I also like to use that, this doesn't work all the times, but get permission later and try it first. But I understand Kyle and Gala had to work with the bureaucracy of Ohio State, so it's easy for me to say.
Okay, it is 2:30. We have to wrap it up. Wow, I'm overwhelmed by the amount of information, and I learned a whole lot today. So please keep this conversation going, and I automatically invite you all to come back. Perhaps even Rick, once you get another one of those events under your belt, you can come back and tell us how things are implementing, because speaking for everyone on the line, we want to hear more. So thank you to Kyle and Rick and Gala for joining us today. And again, if you're in San Francisco for the national conference, please join them. Be sure to join this interest group, and everything. You can find all the information you need for a recording of this, for a PDF copy of this presentation, and to learn how to record your CM credits by heading over to ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. So Kyle, Rick, Gala, thank you for joining us today. And everyone, hey, have a great weekend, and we'll talk next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.